All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Izzy Greenberg. I run the Middlesex Coalition for Children. Let's see. Today we have our resident panel of experts with us, Meryl Gay, Ava Bermudez Zimmerman. Let's see here. I'm sorry, I got too many things happening right away. I'm beginning this in a little bit of a Monday morning fog, so my apologies. Welcome to Early Care Connection. I did not say that. So we have some really interesting stuff going on today. We have Allison Logan, co-founder of the CT359 Network, senior consultant for the CT Data Collaborative. She's here to talk about the the Bridgeport Baby Bundle, along with a whole series of wonderful panelists who will get introduced to you as this progresses. The baby bundle, the lessons learned, what's going to happen moving forward. I want everyone to know about that, and also to stick around after it, because we have a lot to talk about with the Blue Ribbon panel, which is having its series of responding sessions based on their draft recommendations, which came out on Thursday night, which we will also share information and some takeaways for you on that. So we have a lot to talk about. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, of course, to Sandra for providing interpretation for us this morning, opening these up to so many people. A reminder that we will not have a call, let's see, on the 25th, in observance of Rosh Hashanah. That is for me and for the probably smaller number of folks here for whom that's a major holiday, but we won't be meeting on that day. And also a reminder, well, for me and the panelists to speak slowly and help Sandra do her job well. The chat is the right place for all of you to share information with each other and to let us know if there are any technical difficulties. The Q&A is the right place if you have questions for our panelists. So please use that well. And you can do the upvoting as usual. And our panelists are also welcome to answer any questions written in the chat, so you can monitor it that way. Okay, Meryl, did you want to do any other introduction, or should we just turn it over to Allison? Okay, great. All right, Allison. And I'm also going to give you the chance to let folks know what grand rounds are if this is confusing to anyone. So Allison, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, well, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Izzy, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak. I was the former executive director in Bridgeport for Bridgeport Prospers, where the Bridgeport Baby Bundle began. And we started this work in 2016, and I'm going to talk through about lessons learned and kind of where we're going with this work with a new investment from Pritzker Children's Initiative, which will be housed at the Connecticut Data Collaborative. In grand rounds, I did some grand rounds back in the day in Bridgeport Hospital. It's really a medical term. So medical doctors get together to do grand rounds, and they do learning. And a part of this network that we're building, CT359 network, is really about learning what's happening in the child development space in the state, and really learning from each other. So that's where that grand rounds comes from. So I'm going to share my screen just to make sure, hopefully everybody can see it.
We are seeing it, yep.
Is that good? Okay. And I'm going to hide the thumbnails as well. So if you need to talk to me, just make sure you just let me know, okay? So we appreciate that this is co-hosted by the Connecticut Early Childhood Alliance today. After my presentation, I will be introducing some national commentators: Joe Waters, Dr. David Willis, Dr. Renee Boynton Jarrett, Elaine Zimmerman, and we will be having a panel talking about the national implications of this work. And I also want to acknowledge the contribution of Dr. Janice Grindell, who is probably listening today, but not on the panel, a senior consultant as well with me at the Connecticut Data Collaborative. First, I wanted to start with some remembering. Today is a Remembrance Day for September 11th, and I'm going to read a poem called Where Hope Comes From by Nikita Gill. It comes from heartache, and it grows like the lone sapling from ashes of loss. and it carves its way out of the heavy heart of tragedy and its heavy cost. And it rises like a soldier, thought lost, returning home to his mother, and it smiles like the calm, clear sky following weeks of one storm after another. And maybe this is why, when Pandora opened the box that carried such calamities, which afflicted all of mankind, gentle hope emerged from there too. What else helps us overcome suffering, if not hope, a chance to bloom? If we can all just take one moment to remember. Thank you for that. And what's inside the presentation today? We're going to be looking back and learning about what we learned through the Bridgeport Baby Bundle and what we learned back in 2006 around this prenatal to 3 child development work. We're going to introduce you to the CT359 network, which is a new network that we're building under the auspices of the Connecticut Data Collaborative. And then we're going to be looking forward to some sweet spot opportunities and opportunities that we see in the state moving forward. So looking back and learning, in 2006, there was a Ready by 5 and Fine by 9 investment framework that was created. And then in 2016, the Bridgeport Baby Bundle framework was created. In 2006, the first Early Childhood Education Cabinet published a Ready by 5, Fine by 9, 50-item framework to assure that all Connecticut children reach appropriate developmental milestones from birth to age 5, begin kindergarten with the knowledge and skills behavior needed for school success, and then have K-3 education experiences that extended children's birth to 5 learning. This framework also explicitly called for the building communications between children's health and child care systems. This was back in 2006. And in 2007, the Connecticut Early Childhood Research and Policy Council was led by business, higher education, and philanthropy, and produced a 2-year investment plans with 11 top priorities. And this investment was a sum of about $74 million. And this was to expand and strengthen preschool, support parents, support community early childhood councils, assess early entering kindergarten skills and knowledge, building a data system that linked early childhood to public education, create an early childhood research and policy institute, and support state management. And this was the breakdown. So looking at the breakdown of the investment in millions, and just wanted to note that preschool funding did dominate this proposed 2007 investment plan. In 2009, the panel was disbanded governmentally. So this study just kind of sat and did not go anywhere after 2009. And then going back to the Bridgeport Baby Bundle in 2016, so Bridgeport, there's a map of Bridgeport right there. So it's located within the richest county in America. Many of Bridgeport's young children live with limited resources, facing intergenerational trauma and structural racism. Data over many years revealed that Bridgeport children, more than 2/3 were not at target at age 3. And then out of the Strive Together Cradle to Career initiative, Bridgeport Prospers, which I was the executive director, the Bridgeport Baby Bundle was born. And how did we get to, and how did Prenatal to 3 become our focal point? So through our collective impact work, our community action network started to collect data, and took a year to do a landscape analysis. And we looked at data from Bridgeport. We looked at all of the assets. We looked at data from our community partners. And so this collective action network found data, Head Start data, that 75% of 3-year-olds entering Head Start were already not reaching age developmental milestones. 21% of mothers had no or inadequate prenatal care, and 63% of the city's births, around 2,000 yearly births, were Medicaid funded. So we partnered that with science. So we looked at the neuroscience of early development, the biology of stress and the science of hope, looking at the social determinants of health, and then looking at educational health and racial inequities. So we partnered that together to create something called our Baby Bundle Framework. And we had 7 core community strategies in this framework. Strategies 1, 2, 3 were focused on people. So we looked at universal supports for everybody in the community, prenatal to 3 and their families, and targeted services for primary caregivers. We looked at authentic family and community engagement and having community co-design this process. And then an army of helpers, citizen advocates, and strategic communicators to really help us advance the message of the importance of the prenatal to 3 years. Strategies 4 and 5, we focused on organizations and their practices. So we looked at trauma-informed organizations. We looked at wellness navigators, so increasing doulas and community health workers to connect with families. And we leaned in with our community health centers in the city. And then promoting healthy organizations and relationships. And we had a focus on equity and justice within our organizations. And then strategies 6 and 7, focusing on system change and data and sustainability, a broad base of funding strategies with an investment frame. And all of this work really parallels with the Medicaid's First 1,000 Days movement, and it's aligned with the Center for Social Policy's Nurture Connection framework, and then adaptable by other communities. Because this is a framework and it's not a bunch of services, this can really be adaptable to other communities. So what was in our Bridgeport Baby Bundle framework? So we worked with what was there. We worked with the supports that were there. We worked with the universal supports that were there. And we designed a framework that had universal supports and more targeted supports for families that need it. So we, back in 2020, we started our journey for universal home visiting. And most of you know on here that universal home visiting will be beginning in Bridgeport. With a combination of Family Connects and community health worker design. It's called Family Bridges, and you've heard Beth talk about this through the OEC. That will be launching in Bridgeport in 2023. We had media tools designed for parents to support healthy development, the Bridgeport Basics, which comes out of Boston, the Harvard Achievement Gap Institute, the Boston Basics. And these were media tools that were spread across the city in multiple locations and designed for parents on the importance of the first 3 years. Developmental tracking and coaching, Sparkler mobile app, as many of you know, are using Sparkler in your own cities and towns. So Sparkler was advanced through the city. We had early literacy supports. Read to Grow expanded to both birthing hospitals. So every mom has a touch point in the birthing hospital with reading information and first books for their babies. And Reach Out and Read expanded to 95% of pediatric offices in the city. So we had 2 really great evidence-based early literacy supports. And then Group Time for Parents, we expanded Music Together across the city, and we had several infant and toddler music together groups across the city. So there were supports for everybody within the city, and then more targeted supports. So we have wraparound wellness navigators, community health workers that are linked to universal home visiting. A Medicaid maternity bundle, which includes doulas. The doulas that have worked in Bridgeport are on the decision-making table for the Medicaid maternity bundle, and really looking to expand that work over the next several years. Our home visiting programs were all aligned and coordinated with a referral process through 211. That was not occurring when we first started this work. It was all separate. And so we were able to align and targeted home visiting programs and actually have a really systemic referral process through 211. And then we increased infant toddler care for center-based childcare for early Head Start and All Our Kin. All of this together was called our Bridgeport Baby Bundle and the supports for families in Bridgeport. I'm not going to take you through the entire timeline. I put this in here because I know people will have access to this later and access to this recording and presentation later. But this was our timeline, and it's a really good way to see how relationships built and where we started with the data and where we ended up. I just want to highlight in 2020 and 21 was a really important year because that's the year that the Bridgeport Baby Bundle received a national attention intervention and funding from Pritzker Children's Initiative, a 3-year community innovation grant. And so that's where we really got a very large investment, and we got some amazing technical assistance from Make Home Financing, Nemours Children's Health Systems. And so you can see in 2021, even though it was COVID and COVID did affect this work, that's when the work really took off in 2020 and 21. So where do we go from here? So that was a 3-year investment from Pritzker Children's Initiative. And so the Pritzker Children's Initiative actually made a second grant. And this really is taking what we learned in Bridgeport, the lessons that we learned, and expanding how do we expand those lessons to other communities within Connecticut? And actually, how do we take those lessons learned and really look at Connecticut systems related to prenatal to 3? And
Allison, can I interrupt and just ask you to go a little bit slower? This is very dense information.
I'll go slower.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So this grant is housed at the Connecticut Data Collaborative. And so we're looking at how do we expand the lessons learned in Bridgeport, and then how do we move forward? So our Pritzker Children's Initiative Systems Grant, this is for 2023 through 2026, so the next 3 years. So our work here is to support the implementation to share lessons learned from Bridgeport and processes from a comprehensive and high quality community-based prenatal to 3 system that we developed in Bridgeport. So how do we take lessons learned and share those? So the goals are to share the lessons learned, to identify with state leaders and policy and data levers for state policy framework that support on-target development, continue progress toward Bridgeport goal of all children on track. So Bridgeport work will continue within Bridgeport Prospers, and report on specific indicators of progress. And this work really started the CT359 network. And so some of you might be wondering why, and what is that, and why did we start that? So when we were doing work in Bridgeport, systems transformation at the community level revealed that there are policy and data issues that can't be resolved at the local level. Yet when Janice and I looked, we found really no collaborative entity or cross-agency collective focused on the prenatal to 3 North Star of on-target development at the age of 3. So the CT359 network, which actually means on target at 3, on target at 5, on target at 9, was launched in January. And so this is not a governance body, but a network of members and friends who look at data through public education and information sharing to help organizations and government make policy and resource decisions. And so how will we work? We'll work with a network of information partners, which we called our Circle of Friends, who have a stake in the early success of young children. There are many who are on this call right now who are part of our Circle of Friends. And the deep work will come from smaller groups who opt in on focus groups on specific areas of promise, which we're calling our sweet spots. We currently have 27 members in our CT359 working group, and they're university partners, Connecticut folks from the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood, Connecticut Office of Policy and Management, Child Health Development Institute, United Way, Philanthropy, Early Childhood Funder Collaborative, CT Data Collaborative. We have a lot of folks who are already on our working group. And we have some national advisors who some are on the call today from the Center for Study of Social Policy, Stanford University, Salesforce, Capita, and Pritzker Children's Initiative. So we are working from our values. We say that CT359 network is not your mother's Chevy, because it's not an old kind of organizational group and an old structure and creating its own entity. We are an opt-in, and we're focusing on a few sweet spots for change. So we're really targeted, focused on some things that really can have some impact in the state. We don't have the luxury of time. The first 3 years of life are a hotbed for brain and development and emotional growth. So we don't have the luxury of time. So we need to move quickly. We need a broad reach and a targeted effort. We will communicate relentlessly but smartly. We will learn how to share information of things that are already happening in the state so we can learn from the best. And then children's and family voice is imperative in this effort as well. We'll make mistakes along the way, but we'll fix them and learn from them. And we'll live and work by quiet greatness formula, an uncommon work ethic, diligence, domain expertise, and the love of the game and honor. So this is we're working from a set of values. We have some successes in the last 8 months. We began in 2023 in January with 8 people. Our CT 359 working group has now grown to 27. Our circle of friends includes more than 24 organizations. We hope some of you on here would love to join us as well, and I'll give you more information about how to join our working groups. Our 4th Monday virtual learning series has been relaunched as a series of grand rounds, which this is the first of, and a leadership fireside chats, which are open to everybody. You will be getting invites to all of those, so we hope that you can attend those. We have Medicaid data for the first time. 4 years of 2019 through 22 Medicaid data across 22 Connecticut towns that looks at the children's ages 1, 2, and 3 and shows very low rates of developmental screening and referrals. So that's where our first sweet spot comes from, looking at developmental screening. Cross-community network building. We have over a dozen Connecticut towns on in our circle of friends. We look at targeted data, policy, and practice areas emerging as sweet spots, and we can sustain this work. The National Pritzker Children's Initiative has awarded a 3-year grant to expand these cross-community connections and our CT 359 network. We're going to be looking at focusing on some transformational change. So looking at focusing on the pregnancy and birth experience, looking at doulas and community health workers as trusted caregivers, participation in universal home visiting at birth, which will launch in Bridgeport in this year and look to expand across the state, looking at perinatal supports for maternal health and maternal mental health, looking at focusing on child-adult relational health and working with the Center for Study for Social Policy to bring nurture connection movement to Connecticut, universal light touch and natural supports through the baby bundle portfolio. So looking to expand things like Sparkler, the basics, and our early literacy supports like Reach Out and Read and Read to Grow. And then looking at a focus on positive parent pediatric partnerships and making sense of developmental screening, referrals and services, promoting family-centered, strength-based relational health and pediatric practices. So that's our framework for the CT 359 network. And I want to talk about some early sweet spot opportunities that we see. So focusing on looking at the Ready by 5 and 5 by 9 vision and the work that was done back in 2006 and see where are we now. Cross-agency improvements in data development and use, developmental screening with a family-informed referral service and process, and building knowledge connections among Connecticut community initiatives. So these are the 4 areas and sweet spot opportunities that we see over the next year. And we welcome anybody who would like to be on any of these working groups to really look at this more deeply and closely. So our look back. So Ready by 5, 5 by 9 that I discussed at the beginning was done back in 2006. And we are going to take some time over this year to really look back at that. And it'll be vitally important as the governor's Blue Ribbon panel on childcare proposes a large investment in early care and education in Connecticut. There are really some important lessons from 2006 that were discovered and looked at, and really looking at a financing model back then. So this look back is really important to say, where are we now in the state of Connecticut? Where were we and where are we now, and where can we move forward? So our next steps in that is a design for study was completed in December. We published a brief on what's inside the 2006. We will be publishing a brief on what's inside the 2006 Early Childhood Framework in January. We will publish a legislative brief on the Look Back series, Progress and Opportunities, in April. And then we'll publish a full review and host another one of these grand rounds on findings and recommendations. We're going to be calling that our Canary Report #2 in October 24. Those are the next steps for the look back. And anybody who is on this, there will be a working group around that. And anybody who is on this is more than welcome invited if you're really interested to take a look back at that 2006 report. Our next step for over 2023-24 is an area of focus of looking at improving data development and the use of data. So we received Medicaid data and that report was published. And so we will refresh our Medicaid developmental screening data report and we will share with 22 communities. And this data will be for 22 communities around developmental screening. We will look at developmental screening data. We will host working sessions on developmental screening data sources and tools with review of entry decay assessments. We will look at developmental screening opportunities that are happening across the state and lift up those opportunities that are already happening. We will also look at the birth to 3 data and review emerging data from the OSEP grant that is occurring right now and explore expansion to services to serve children at risk with mild and significant delays. We will look at race and ethnicity data. We will host a working group conversation with the Connecticut Office of Health Services on an implementation of the Public Act 2135 on language and coding in data, and link with the Data Equity Community of Practice at the CT Data Collaborative. And we will also look at unique identifiers for children birth to 3. That has been a large issue in the state of Connecticut. And we will explore with a broad range of interested organizations moving the assignment and use of a unique universal child ID at birth. Our next spot is looking at the design of developmental screening within a family-informed comprehensive referral and service process. So our area of focus is looking at the tools like Sparkler, like the paper ASQ, like things that are going on across the state, and review developmental measurement tools across agencies. We will look at best practices already happening and support a pediatric community of practice reviewing developmental screening data for policy, data, coding challenges, and including implicit bias. So we will be working with a group of pediatricians in the state looking at developmental screening issues and opportunities. We will be supporting the 4 HRSA-funded communities that will expand developmental screening, referral, and service. Those are in Fairhaven, New Haven, Norwalk, Plainfield, and Middletown. And we congratulate those 4 community health centers for receiving that HRSA grant. We will continue our Grand Round series. We will host in the fall to include presentations on the North Hartford Ascend Pipeline. That will be an October 4th presentation. The role of successful Help Me Grow hub programs in other places like Tarrant County, Texas, and South Carolina. We're fortunate that we are partners with many other Pritzker grantees that are doing amazing work, especially in the Help Me Grow context. So we want to learn from places that are doing amazing things and have exceptional things happening that can really inform the work of Connecticut. And then another piece is really uplifting. Some of you know about the Norwalk ASQ work, and we're going to look at we're going to explore the cost of a replication of the Norwalk 5-year ASQ initiative, which has seen amazing results in tracking children, following children, especially children who fall in the gray area of the ASQ, and supporting them through home visiting. And Norwalk has incorporated this work within their healthcare center in receipt of the HRSA grant. And we're also going to start building knowledge and connections among community initiatives. So with partners, our CT 359 network will host grand rounds just like this one for knowledge and sharing. Because what we found in this work is there's a lot of things that are happening in the state, across communities, across the state, and a lot of people don't know or don't know about them, or we're going to try to figure out what is the bridge between these things. So our grand round series series will include looking at the Family Bridges Universal Home Visiting Program and looking how it's linking the Family Connects model with community health workers. So really that is the first time in Family Connects work that they are really partnering with community health workers. And so we're going to follow that and really look at the design model of that. And then really looking at the INCK work, so the Wraparound New Haven Medicaid Transformation Model. So we're going to have that be shared. We're going to have the North Hartford Promise Zone Ascend Pipeline sharing, the Hartford's Early Intervention System Development for Young Children, which is the OSEP grant. We're going to have grand rounds around that. The Hartford's 5-year birth to 3 longitudinal cohort tracking initiative, Connecticut Data Project in Hartford with Head Start to examine COVID impacts. Waterbury is doing some amazing work around improving perinatal outcomes for Black mothers. Norwalk's 5-year ASQ, we did one presentation on that. We're going to do another one to really look at how we could expand that across the state. Eastern Connecticut Center for Housing, Equity, and Development. The HRSA developmental screening grants, we are hoping to create a collaborative community of practice with the healthcare centers that received that grant and also with the healthcare centers that applied and did not receive that grant to really look at how developmental screening really can be uplifted within the healthcare centers and looking at areas of practice and areas of promise with the healthcare centers work that received the HRSA grants. And then Medicaid developmental screening referral and service data, we will do a presentation for the 22 Connecticut communities on the data that we receive. I know that's a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I am glad that you're going to be able to have access to this PowerPoint, and there are information. If you would like to become a part of our circle of friends, you can reach out to myself. You can reach out to Dr. Janice Grindell. And I wanted to remind everybody that our next Grand Rounds presentation will be for the North Hartford Ascend Pipeline, Dr. Paul Dworkin from the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. And that will be on October 4th from 9:30 to 10:30. And we will send out invitations through the Connecticut Alliance and through the Early Childhood Listserv, so you can get on that if you would like as well.
Thank you, Allison. First, let me just ask, do you intend to share this PowerPoint with us?
Yes, I will share.
Great. Yeah. And do you also have it in Spanish, or is it English only?
I have it only in English. I can do a translation for you if you would like, and I can translate to Spanish.
If you can, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I can do that for you.
Okay, so we will be sharing out then this recording, the PowerPoint in English and in Spanish. And someone earlier had also asked for, I guess, the study directly. Let me see.
Yes,
Q&A. Copy of the research report.
Yes.
That's also something you can share?
That's also something I can share. So I don't have it to drop in the link right now, but I will share when I share the presentation to you. I can share with you the link, and then I can also share with you the link to the study, and then also the PowerPoint. And there's a few other things that I could link to in there that I can send you. That were
fantastic. So we will put all of that up at earlycareconnection.org in the next 24 to 48 hours when we have all of it compiled. So I'll list that up for everyone here into the chat as well. So, okay, do you want to continue then to introduce guests and to further the conversation?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for taking my presentation. I know I talk fast. I really tried to talk slow, and there was a lot of information in there. I want to introduce Joe Waters. Joe Waters is one of our national advisors, and he's going to facilitate a conversation with some of our other national advisors. So Joe Waters is a social entrepreneur and co-founder and CEO of Capita. Joe spends his days thinking about how we can really build a future in which children and families can realize their full potential in a just, peaceful, prosperous society on a healthier, cleaner, and safer planet. Joe also serves as a senior advisor at Open Fields, a Greenville, South Carolina-based consulting firm. Before starting Capita, Joe was the executive vice president of the Institute of Child Success. He is a member of the board of directors of the Felician Center. Did I say that correctly? Which helps those who struggle meet their basic needs in rural Williamsburg County, South Carolina, and Book Harvest. He graduated from Furman University and earned a master's degree in divinity from Duke University. He lives with his family in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Joe, thank you so much for being here today.
Great. Thank you, Allison, and thank you for the inspiring presentation. I'm delighted to be joined by the other panelists here and by over 230 people who are interested in this work. So this is inspiring. I'd like to just start by saying to everyone who's on the webinar today, if you have questions for Allison based on the presentation that she just gave, please put those in the chat and I will work those in. But I'd like to start by just asking our three other panelists here, Dr. David Willis, Elaine Zimmerman, and Dr. Renee Boynton Jarrett, if they could react to this presentation that you all have just seen, both in terms of what you've seen, but also the national opportunities, both the national opportunities, I think, for this work in Connecticut and how this work in Connecticut can inspire and shape other opportunities across the nation. So, Renee, do you mind if I start with you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's an honor and privilege to be here. And thank you, Allison, for that exciting presentation. I mean, to me, it's very clear that the work that's happening in Bridgeport is kind of setting a model for the nation. I think it connects and aligns with a lot of interesting aspects of work that are happening nationally. But I think one of the things that distinguishes it is how comprehensive we are thinking about from preconception, prenatal, on through early childhood, and the alignment of programs, services, and thinking about funding opportunities, particularly how Medicaid and other federal sources of financing can support this. So to me, I think that there's an incredible opportunity to really scale and align. And I think the enthusiasm and excitement that happened with the baby bundle in 21, as Allison was referencing, was kind of a glimmer into what can be magnified in time to come. So those are just my initial reactions.
And my apologies, I skipped a step, which was asking you all to introduce yourselves. So, Renee, would you mind we just rewind quickly?
Absolutely.
Who are you and what expertise do you bring to this conversation?
No problem. So I'm Renee Boynton Jarrett. I'm a primary care pediatrician. I'm based at Boston Medical Center, and I direct Vital Village Networks, which is community engagement initiative focused on building research evidence, expanding intentional cross-sector collaborations, and supporting leadership development for institutions as well as community leaders to promote child and family well-being.
Great. Thank you, Renee. Elaine Zimmerman, can we come to you? Introduce yourself and then a response.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I'm so glad to be here. It's so good to see so many friends and colleagues. Allison, thank you so much for that just wonderful report. Introduction, I'm the regional administrator for the Administration for Children and Families, representing the 6 states of New England and based in Boston, near Renee. I think that what really stood out to me, I mean, this is robust, braided together masterfully. I agree with Renee. I think the Medicaid piece is the secret sauce here for moving forward. I found myself, while you were talking, Allison, thinking a lot about a particular article that was written by Ed Ziegler years ago. He wrote it with Sherry Hayes, and it was called Components of Policy Formation. And it was a document that I ended up just sort of keeping in my back pocket at all times, the sort of key points of it, which I kept on an index card. And it was really how to move an agenda forward for children. So as I'm listening, and this is so brilliantly done and masterfully braided with the social determinants of health, what I'm thinking about is how to make this sustainable and how to make it something that the public claims rather than strictly the field of early care and education. So how do we get something in a time of profound culture wars and where something that's wonderful suddenly disappears because a war was made of it? How do we stitch together and think about what makes something sustainable in this new current environment that we're in? It's 9/11 notwithstanding, the day is apt to be talking about tactics and strategy. In their study, what they did was they looked at what were the components that allowed Congress to move children's policy forward. And they came up with certain points, steps that I think are still the same today. And so I was thinking about them, Allison, as you were presenting. One was, you have to have a constituency. Without a constituency, it simply will not endure, whatever it is. Two, you have to have a leader. You need to be able to aptly define the problem and the solution if you know what it is or what many solutions are. You need to have media, and you need to masterfully describe the context. So as you were presenting, I was thinking about the need for a constituency. That the constituency cannot be the field itself. It has to be the family. And that how we get, because you referenced, Allison, you referenced co-design, which I thought was so wonderful. And you referenced the point, the voice of the provider, the voice of the family. But I think really building that out more than is currently in the plan might be useful. Because I think the more we have the consumer saying, this mattered, this changed my life, this helped my child with school readiness, this helped our family economically, we recommend this, is worth right now at this current point in history, it's worth gold. Because without the consumer, I'm afraid, even if we've got the whole bundle, somebody can steal the bundle. So I think about constituency, and I also think about the media. You presented, Allison, in a masterful way for those of us engaged in the field. And I'm thinking that we need the artistic piece of this work that renders it into a haiku, that makes it simple, accessible, to the point, very fast, and to the heart. Because once again, if we don't capture the heart and carry the heart with what we're doing now, it's another risk. So I'm thinking as a tactician and as a strategist, and those are just a few thoughts. The other that, just checking my notes here, is to think about where the legislature is in this, where the Connecticut legislature is in this, and also where are the fathers? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. There's some points in there I want to come back to with Allison during the course of our discussion. But first, David, I'll turn it to you.
It's hard to follow Elaine after that beautiful, beautiful statement. But I'm David Willis, pediatrician, developmental pediatrician, now a senior fellow at the Study for Social Policy, working to advance early relational health, partnering with systems and communities and social change. We've created the Nurture Connection framework, which is advancing early relational health, and thinking about it as a social change effort. And the excitement of being here is the inspiration of this good work, Allison, that began a long time ago, then really activated in 2016, then ever forward now, and then where you're moving forward. I have followed the work when I was at HRSA, because I was within the home visiting and early childhood systems work there, came to be aware of the very foundation of the baby bundle because they were thinking about longitudinal data impacts, thinking as population-based efforts, thinking and knowing about activating all families that care about the well-being of their children, and bringing the story and the message of what we know and the activation of the constituency in local communities. And I was so inspired by the very start, where the power of interest came out of families realizing hope and opportunity if they gathered together. And then the brilliance, Elaine, I'm so with you about the brilliance of the strategic processes of partnering between what we know at some level of both the science and then the systems, but more importantly, the engagement of families and families owning and knowing of hope and possibility. I'm an old guy, so I was inspired by the Harlem Children's Own view, which was let the people themselves partner arm in arm with hope and possibility and get out of the way and longitudinally be thinking about how does people that come together with vision and effort find that path. So I've been inspired all along with the journey, Elaine, of what and Allison, of what you showed today. And what you didn't say that I learned about after 2, 3, 4 years of your good work, you know, where you were activated by those, quote, 2/3 of children not on target, which just pains my heart, pains my soul. And I know, and we all know, that those life course trajectories start early. I mean, really early. We also know that if we're intentional, it doesn't have to be that way. And thereby, the beginning of your good work has begun to show some data shifts at some population levels. I'm aware that you're starting to see some shift of outcome. What that means, Elaine, back to your sense of constituency, the celebration that families can know that things can be different for them. How does hope get aligned with what we know? Far beyond developmental screening, which is finding the problems, back to developmental screening being an assurance mechanism that shows if we work intentionally and families own their supports and our systems are in support of what families' needs really are, then we can start feeling families can sense and know there's hope and there's possibility for them. So from my vantage point, and there's much more we can talk about, there's so much that excites me because this is taking a collective impact strategy. This is taking an all-in strategy. This is moving far beyond thinking of programmatic efforts. This is moving far more about the ownership of a community to the possibility that something can be different for them for their trajectory of their young children. And the bundle effort, and especially the data platform and the excitement of utilizing data to inform change, as well as to demonstrate impact, is deeply, clearly emergent. That's what thrills me about this kind of work. So there's much, much more I can bring. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I want to pick up immediately on, Elaine, your point about ownership and developing a constituency. And Allison, I want you to respond, right? Mm-hmm. But I also want to hear from the other panelists what they've seen across the country about successfully creating constituencies, successfully building ownership among communities, and not necessarily just for this work that's focused on our youngest children, but in some other policy areas as well where we maybe can learn. But Allison, I'll start with you. What have you seen about building the constituency beyond the field in Connecticut?
I always say that progress moves at the speed of relationships. And I think that that's exactly what happened in Bridgeport. So I think, you know, in Bridgeport, we started building that relationship, first of all, with the community. When we had Bridgeport Basics, that was everywhere. We had community baby showers and we had opportunities for families to come talk and meet and just center themselves around the prenatal to 3 work. And I think that it takes a long time to build that within community. And we moved from a kind of a community informational model to a co-design model. And that took 7 years. So at the end, families were actually on the decision-making tables in the healthcare system, helping us design. Our doulas were on the Medicaid decision-making tables and really designing the work with us, and the community was designing the work with us. And so I think, that evolution is like a presentation among itself, like how that, evolved over time. But I think, the work here is really taking what we did within community. And Elaine, I completely 100% agree with you, because this wouldn't have worked in Bridgeport if we didn't have that. If we didn't have parents at the table, if we didn't have community at the table, if we didn't, it wouldn't have worked there. And that's what made it so special, right? So how do you take these lessons learned and really move that up to kind of a state level and cross communities? So how do you get this going in other communities? And we're so fortunate to have so many communities on our CT359 network, and data for 22 communities, and communities are like, we already want some pieces of this. So how do you build this within a community where it's community owned, right? Where families have a stake in the decision-making process, and that families really feel wrapped around by their community, and that they're part of this work. And so that's part of this. How do you translate that? How do you translate what we did in Bridgeport to other communities across the country? And that's Pritzker Children's Initiative's amazing vision, is to help us figure that out. How do we package these things that are really easily adaptable to other communities, easily translated, really taking this more complex kind of language and making it really translatable for communities? So I think that's part of this work in this grant, which is so exciting for me to kind of take something that was built in Bridgeport and move it.
Great, thank you. Other panelists, a response to what Elaine was saying, and then Allison's comment about constituency. Renee, maybe we could start with you since you spoke first.
Absolutely. I couldn't be more enthused by what Allison shared. And I think Elaine's comments on building this constituency are key. David made a point around the data as a catalyst for change. So Allison was sharing that co-design was a really critical element in really having and building that sense of ownership. One of the things that we help support and that we see happening around the country is also having an accountability framework and measures of that degree of community ownership, that degree of community involvement, and how people feel about the co-design process. So actually measuring those process measures become really critical, and adding those to the dashboard as well. So while we're seeing children and programs and families improve, are we measuring the process elements around community co-design and equitable partnerships? And are we seeing improvement there as well, as kind of the early indicators of what we think may take more years to evolve and improve, and also build that sustainability over time? So if our vision is, 5 to 10 years from now, actually, those who would be presenting on this webinar are parents and caregivers as the real owners of this. How would we actually capture that we're working towards that? So I think that that's a big part of galvanizing the constituency and ownership. And then I think, as Allison was sharing, how do we take this model and share it with other communities? And they're really effective strategies. Pritzker's doing a great job around this through their children's initiative of really supporting learning communities. So these cohorts are really spaces where peer communities can share challenges, strategies, and ideas with each other and really help accelerate change. And I think that there's a need to build and study and evaluate the strength of those models as well. A lot of times it's anecdotal, the value of these peer learning communities and how change can be accelerated. We can actually also capture evidence around that as well, which can make it even more ripe for sustainable investments.
That's great. And I want to pick up on your word accountability. I mean, we heard in Allison's presentation a commitment to family voice. I'm really interested in how we move to just hearing from families, to holding ourselves accountable to what families are telling us they need, And I think particularly there, you know, in philanthropy, take for example, there's been a real move to hearing more family voice in philanthropy, but we still don't see the families who are in the community represented in decision-making bodies, for example, at philanthropic in philanthropy. They're not the ones who are casting the final vote for grants and those sorts of things. So David, you have been a champion for incorporation of family voice across the Nurture Connection network around the country. And I'm just curious to hear from you, how do we move from just hearing from families to holding ourselves accountable to families?
Thanks, Joe. Yes, I was reflecting on Renee's comments and then also Elaine's about how do you move this, and back to Allison's comment, it is also at the speed of trust. And that's not an easy journey. I mean, moving a framework that we all can see is meaningful into the experience that families can have to participate within it, and the co-design what's meanings of families will help shape what is meaningful to a community of itself. What we've been learning through Nurture Connection in our listening deeply to the family experience is every neighborhood and community is its own story, and the people and their own lived experience and the challenges and opportunities is very local. And engagement where families trust to actually have developmental screening done, or families trust that they will actually participate in a support effort made available, be that a home visiting program or be that a universal touch point of home visiting and the like, that requires a level of families in the local neighborhoods believing they could trust the partnerships to a purpose. And the beauty of the Bridgeport bundle was it started there deeply in trust building through the community networks of families, be that churches, grandmothers, others that were engaging. Every community's got its bit of its own story about how they've been on the journey of racial justice, social justice, and relationships with trust and programmatic efforts. So what we've been learning through Nurture Connection, you got to start there. You have to start first of creating community tables of people that care about the well-being of their children and their families, with the large number of people being the constituents, as Elaine was talking about, with a few systems voices, as opposed to the opposite, where it's all systems people and all program people and the like, and 2 or 3 parents. That is not really going to create an authentic, trusted development conversation. How does the community own the opportunity, and how do the support systems and structures meet their needs? These are the kind of turning the power dynamic upside down and meeting family needs. And all of us then that are in systems of opportunity being responsive to how families are seeing that kind of work. Yet that's all moving. The community health worker movement, the doula movement, Medicaid trying to broaden to team-based care models in the health system, where people out of the community become part of the workforce that helps create trusted relationships within the structures, is how this is beginning to move. And within that is where then engagement comes. But think about the hope that brings for neighborhood families to build that constituency that cares. Elaine, I don't know how to do a haiku, but I think there are storytellings of families that are telling us this story of a new experience of partnership to their well-being that's in front of us, and elevating family voice, family leadership, and telling those stories, what's changing for family experiences, the way that Nurture Connection movement grows. That's where you go from one community to a next, and one with vision to what's possible, led by families telling the vision of what they're experiencing of change, is where I think the power of the opportunity is in front of us.
Yeah, that is just so beautifully stated. I think that it's story plus data that combusts into something that leads to sort of like an insight, like you would see in a little diagram of a cartoon. It's the combination, and not to underestimate the power of art, and art is story. So however that is done, I mean, I think all the ingredients are here. So what we're really talking about is how to hold this up, because it's already masterfully done. But bringing in the constituent, these are profoundly fragile times.
Right. The
vase has many cracks. And how do you keep the water in it? That's what I'm trying to talk to today. Mm-hmm. Is how we keep the water in the vase. And I think constituent piece is critical. The Assistant Secretary at the Administration for Children and Families has moved this piece on voice into sort of primacy, saying essentially that lived experience needs to be embedded into the entire agency in all that we do, in how we budget. One of the things that stands out in that process is that we talk a lot about bringing in the constituent, telling their story, but we haven't really defined well what a feedback loop looks like. So I might come and give feedback. I might be part of a neighborhood conversation, a table of sorts. But how do I know what has happened with that conversation? And, we dare not. I think there's real problems with false empowerment if one believes that just because they say something, the world changes. That would be pretty dangerous, and it would allow for very important things to be undone as well. So I don't mean to oversimplify the power of voice, but it's the accrual of voice that leads to something where people go, well, there's something here. And so I think thinking through how to share, Allison, the fabulous work you're doing on co-design, and how to maybe think further about what a feedback loop looks like. So that over time, I know that if I am a dad and I give feedback, it's not that I presume that my feedback is going to become law, but that it's added to something, and that someone comes back and I get information and I know where the conversation where parents spoke went. And I know maybe there were 15 recommendations. I learned that maybe 2 were taken. Mm-hmm. That creates a democracy. It's an important civic process that I don't think we've adequately built. Sometimes I think, I'm not referring to Baby Bundle here, but I think across the country, people think that getting input is enough. And I think that feedback loop is our next responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I think this also becomes an opportunity, right, to do some community healing, right? Some national healing, right? You think about those cracks in the vase, these sorts of opportunities, in a sense, become bigger than their immediate objectives for healing, bringing people together, and restoring trust. Allison, building off of that comment, and also the question that that Janice had offered in the chat as Elaine was speaking, can you talk about this as it relates to the connections built with other partners, right? With other institutional partners in the community, their level of responsiveness, openness to this, and how maybe even through these processes, you all have built trust among institutions within the community that is going to help propel this work for hopefully generations.
That's a great question. And it does not happen overnight. So this was a very long road. So I think, when we started working, we specifically had a pediatric champion. So we started working in the healthcare system, right? Within this work, in the hospital system and the community health system, there was a huge chasm of trust between the community and the healthcare system. And so we spent several years really trying to close that chasm. And we did that through several things. We actually held conversations with medical providers. So the community had the conversation, and medical providers were there and were able to listen. When we started to do our co-design work, we paid our community as consultants to co-design with us. And we actually had to go and train healthcare providers on how to accept families into the room and how to make sure that their voices are heard and making sure that they're speaking first, and that's not just their eyes are glazing up, like how to work together. We were very fortunate to get a grant, and we were able to combine our Bridgeport Baby Bundle work with the Health Improvement Alliance in the city. And what that did was it pulled the community up into the healthcare and the Healthcare Alliance, and had community actually at the table making decisions, you know, really being part of the process. And I said, I think that's where it really shifted, and the trust like really shifted when we started to do that. And then as a Bridgeport Prospers, we ourselves had a huge amount of community messengers that were actually going out in the community and collecting information from families and bringing that back to really help inform our decisions. So we had a really nice kind of feedback process in Bridgeport, but that took about 7 years to build. And our doulas were able to build amazing trust with our healthcare centers. So it was a process of really figuring out how to build that trust and really holding the healthcare system accountable for including families within the decision-making process. So I'm not saying it's absolutely perfect now, but it really came as a trajectory. And in fact, the next presentation that for our Pritzker Children's Initiative, that's what I'm presenting on, like the roadmap of how we got from there to like this co-design process. So I think, you know, part of the work for this next grant cycle is to take those lessons, even that lesson of how to go from just information sharing to co-design, how to look at building trust within the community as a, you know, so these kind of pieces are the pieces that we will be sharing, you know, for communities that are thinking about doing this level of work. So it's a presentation in itself, right? To really look at that thoughtfully, right?
That's great. Thank you.
And John
Elaine,
shared something earlier in the chat that I think we should pay attention to in terms of what Alice is sharing, which is, you know, well, don't forget the voice of children. He said, you know, I think thinking in this context where possible, cross-generation, so that we're thinking both about children, but we're also thinking about elders, because the message from cross-generation is vital right now and very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I would just
to the heart.
That's great. And I would just add, right, let's remember we're building systems and infrastructures for children who will not be born for a decade or two hence, right? And so there's some really creative ways to also be thinking ahead generationally, to bring the voice of children who are not yet born into the room and into the conversation. Roman Krznaric has highlighted some of those in his book, The Good Ancestor. All of this work, I think, is for every one of us, an effort to become a good ancestor, right? We're building these systems and infrastructures that will outlast us, certainly, and we want to serve children well into the future. Renee, I want to just bring you back into the conversation here and pick up on something Allison had in her presentation, which was we don't have the luxury of time. Children are thousands, tens of thousands of children are born every day in the country. And yet we need the luxury of time to build on trust, to build connections institutionally and with communities. So, you know, I just want to ask you to comment maybe on that paradox, because you're with families over the course of a whole childhood as a primary care pediatrician. So how do you think about that luxury of time as you see kids grow up, I'm sure, very, very quickly?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think it is a paradox, depending on this, you know, kind of the spectrum that we look through. And I think it very much ties to our conversation around like kind of the movement from co-design to shared governance. So who are we sharing responsibility with, right? And there are an abundance of individuals in a community. Maybe they're not all primary care doctors, or maybe they're not all educators, but they are caregivers who are having an influence in the lives of children. And what role do we see them playing in promoting the most optimal outcomes for children? And do we see that role as one where there can be decision-making and power that's like truly and equitably shared with? And to me, when I worry about how urgent the challenges are, I'm often comforted by remembering there's actually an abundance of individuals that are doing things that are making a difference in the lives of children right now. But often at the community level, where it's actually that leadership is invisible. It's not really being acknowledged, and therefore it's also not being invested in. And so as we talk about, this real need to understand and appreciate civic engagement and civic leadership, and the absolute opportunity we have to address these urgent problems at a much larger scale, if we tap into that civic leadership as true leadership. The trade-off is that we have an evidence base that's somewhat limited. The evidence base has been developed by researchers, by people who've had access to privilege and power, but don't necessarily reflect the cultural diversity of communities that are being quote unquote served. So we have to be able to balance our evidence base with community wisdom, which hasn't had the same opportunity to be studied and measured for its impact. Mm-hmm. So there are some mindset changes that are needed for us to actually be able to tap into the potential that's immediately accessible to help children and to help them all thrive. But we really have to get through some of those barriers. So there's some really significant mindsets around where do good, equitable health systems come from? Where do good, equitable education systems come from? And who are the leaders? So if we can kind of work on our mindsets around that leadership, there's actually an abundance of people who can participate. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is we really have to talk about structural and institutional racism as an actor that needs to be addressed. And we have to be absolutely committed to not forgetting about it, right? And to trying to capture and measure it. We do a really good job of measuring individuals' race, ethnicity, and a really poor job of measuring structural racism. And we really actually have to be able to capture and address structural racism because it kind of changes form over time, which makes it very, very hard for us to recognize when it's taking place. So these things become really critical to meeting the urgency of the moment, but doing something different. We can't continue as usual measuring children's race, ethnicity, showing performance by race, ethnicity, those same things. We need to have measures of racism and begin to look at how racism is operating and what are we doing to address racism. So we have to do differently as well.
Great. Thank you, Renee. And we're almost out of time, but I know Dave wanted to come in with one final thought here.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Certainly, Renee, I'm so with you, especially about the abundance framework and especially about abundance, relational abundance. Opportunities around the birth of every baby. And I like to think in my good pediatric style of being that, hope springs eternal around the birth of a baby. Everyone hopes that this baby's opportunity will be better than their own. Healing opportunities exist around that generational moment. We've learned that from the doula networks. We've learned it from the resiliency and the flourishing that happens despite challenges, the generational work, but let's also not forget that there are so many forces against the well-being of babies and caregivers in that earliest period. That's why we called out nurture connection. Don't forget that the foundation of future health, development, and well-being starts very early during the pregnancy, during that first 1,000 days, first 500 days, perhaps even first 300 days, if not first 150 days. Those experiences early get embodied into the next generation, set trajectories for how families trust the people and feel connected around them. So nurture connection is about engaging early with social networks of support, with hope and possibility that then plays through under the speed of trust, the speed of love, and the speed of opportunities. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, David, Elaine, Renee. This was a conversation I wish we could continue for at least another 15 minutes. I wanted especially to get an answer to the question, where are the fathers, that you asked, Elaine? But I think I need to turn it over to Izzy and Allison. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to respond and react to this incredible work that is happening in Bridgeport and across Connecticut. So
thank you. I appreciate you guys so much. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Yes, and
Izzy,
thank you so much.
I think it's to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for bringing your wisdom, expertise. I think it's always good to leave folks wanting a little more also. So, I know folks will continue to follow your work, and we'll post, as I said, we'll post this all up on our website, earlycareconnection.org. If you guys continue to share your grand rounds in the ECE listserv, I know that folks are paying attention there. So thank you all for this important work and important sharing with our community today. So appreciate it. Okay, we have just a short amount of time left before we need to wrap up today. And I want to make sure we get time to just go over the Blue Ribbon panel sessions that are happening this week. Meryl, do you want to kick that part off? How do you want to do this? You are muted.
Yeah, I'm muted, yes. So there is a panel that's taking place in Bridgeport today at 11:30. And then there is a session tomorrow evening in Waterbury, followed by a session in Norwich, I think it is. And then 2 virtual sessions, one in English and one in Spanish. And did you just stick the time?
Hold on, I did, but I sent it not to everyone
Okay.
Okay, so there we go. Everyone should have gotten that. I don't know if it shows up as a photo or not, but I will copy.
No, it's showing
all of
as a link to something.
Yep. It's a link to the photo, but I'll copy and paste the times. Yep.
Okay. So, this is really the opportunity to respond to the plan. I shared the plan in the listserv this morning. It is a 10-page document that outlines what the Blue Ribbon panel is thinking about. They will be refining their plan between now and November to submit to the governor. And then we hope that the governor will be proposing something in the next session. This is supposed to be a 5-year plan. So there is the sort of aspirational, and then there is the what gets translated into budget modifications in this next legislative session. We know that the childcare industry is still under a great deal of strain. We know that almost all of you are having trouble hiring staff. And that means that in many cases, it's impossible to be fully enrolled. And that makes it difficult to break even. With the end of the pandemic relief money, we know that programs are looking at real stress over the next few years. The fact that KinderCare is advertising a free day of care if you sign up tells you that there's strain within the industry, because you don't put things on sale if you've got lots of customers in line to buy things. So we all need to look at that 10-page draft and make your views heard. The Early Childhood Alliance members will be meeting today at 1. If you're a member, you've already gotten a link to it in your email. We'll be talking about sort of our coordinated response to this. And I don't know if Ava wants to talk about the coalition talking points or anything like that.
Right. Ava, are you available? I know you were heading maybe to Bridgeport
Yeah.
for this session. So I don't know if you're available to join this conversation. Okay. I don't think so. I can just let everyone know what I think Ava would probably say, which is that the Child Care Coalition had shared some talking points out in an email. I actually can forward that to the ECE listserv if that's useful. The draft plan is out there. I think that the consensus that I have heard is that there's some good starts in there, but not nearly far enough that this plan, if these recommendations were adopted, does not nearly go far enough to creating the kind of transformative system that we need. And so the reaction, I think, from everyone here should be strong, because we have a real opportunity here to make some big difference for the next period of time, the next 5 years. And so, you know, just that's what I think she would say. So she is not saying that. I'm guessing, but that's what I think what she would say. So I think folks should make their way out to Bridgeport. If you're in that area, you should definitely get to these other in-person sessions: Waterbury tomorrow, Norwich Wednesday, and then Wednesday evening virtual sessions, which I know will be the easiest for folks to get to. There will be food, I know, at the in-person ones, and also the Child Care Coalition is offering an incentive of gas cards, just because I know it's expensive to get to these things. So gas cards for the first 20 in-person speakers at each session. So that's just something else to know. Meryl, you're muted.
Yeah. For folks who aren't able to make it to one of those in-person events, there will be a Spanish virtual session on Wednesday from 6 to 7:30, and then an English session from 9 to 10:30 on Thursday morning.
Yeah. And there was some confusion about the times. Did you say that already, Meryl?
Yeah, the times changed from when they were originally posted. So
the original, so if you had it in your calendar for a while, times are different there now. They've started the in-person sessions a half hour earlier than originally advertised. So today's will be at 11:30. If you're planning to go and haven't hit the road, better do it. Tomorrow's will be at 4:30, and Wednesdays will be at 2 p.m. So get out there and say something if you can. Listen, do we have Rosa DeLauro next week? We may.
That's the plan. Yes.
I think that's a tentative. So that's a big deal, and folks should come back on next Monday for that. We will definitely send something out on the listserv if we can confirm that. So hopefully that's what happens. And then a reminder again that we will not be meeting on the 25th in observance of the holiday. Okay, anything else, Meryl?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you to everyone for being here.
One
Thank
more.
you.
I'm just looking at the Q&A.
One more question.
Okay, so there was someone asked, is anyone really listening about the Blue Ribbon Plan? We gave lots of feedback and none of it was included. And should we be talking to about our concerns with legislators now? I would say this week, let's focus on the Blue Ribbon Panel. We need to make sure that they hear lots of comments about things, and then we can move on to legislators next week.
Yeah, and is anyone listening? I mean,
I think there's a lot of listening going on. There's also the figuring out what folks on the Blue Ribbon Panel think is possible versus what people would like to have happen. And so I think part of that is we need to make sure that there is that constituency calling for change.
Yeah, and pushing them to be bold enough to go beyond what is possible in the limited scope of how we have thought about childcare, and how we're thinking about it right now. We need transformation in order for this to work. I don't know if folks have access through the library or any other way to the New York Times. There was a really excellent article on the childcare crisis in New York City posted this morning. I'll put it in the chat before I close. It was such a good article because we could have written it. You know, that of course, we always like things that make us feel good. But I mean, if I had written it, that's exactly what I would have said. And, you know, the idea that you have to be earning $300,000 or more to be at 7% of your income, well, that's what the article said. I actually thought it was closer to like 275, but whatever, that's a pretty high amount. You know, and the fact that this draft recommendation takes us to 127, which is the median state median income, that means that there's a lot of families who are not yet even at the United Way thriving level from the Alice report that are still going to be paying a lot more for childcare. If you're at 130 and you're paying $40,000 a year for your 2 children to be in childcare, you're at way more than 7%. So I think that we really have to be pushing hard to say, stop thinking about what's possible and think about what is necessary. So that's my 2 cents. And on that, we've got to wrap up. So
okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sandra, for providing translation. Thank you to Renee and Allison. Thank you to the whole group. I know you two are still here, but what a fantastic panel of experts we had today, letting us know about a really, really excellent community program. So make it out to these sessions in person or virtually, and we will see you here next week. Thanks, everyone.